You guys know the story that happened on the new Top Gun movie, where Maverick and Jason, if I remember right, escaped in the F4 Phantom. Sorry, Tomcat. I mean, sorry, the Phantom or Tomcat. Oh my gosh, I keep forgetting. It's been a while since I watched the movie, but it's a great movie. Would highly recommend it. But anyway, they used a old, it's either a fourth or fifth gen fighter to escape sixth gen fighters. And Arsenal X had something like this happen to them in the earlier 2000s. Actually, well, not the earlier 2000s, but like when sixth gen fighter craft were just coming out. And this was something it was a unknown enemy that Arsenal X was still gathering information on. And they recently released and this is one of the reasons why they were jumped by hyper advanced fighters, and they were using the Aworix Screecher because of its maneuverability and ability to hide itself from enemy radar, because it was able to disrupt um, you know uh, disrupt the enemy radar with its plasma screen. It's a radiation screen. But unfortunately, what happened with this one is that this special aircraft was testing out a new artificial intelligence that Arsenal X was trying out, and it is called the Pilot's Aid System, and they were testing to see if it still worked. Even though it was about 50 years old, and like I said, this is one of the reasons why aircraft like Arsenal X's Aworix Screecher and modern day Hyper Screecher are so effective. The Aworix Screecher, back in the day during World War II, and during that episode where they had to defend a surveillance drone, proved their effectiveness against modern day jets. Most dogfights do not usually take place at supersonic speeds. They usually take place at around 700 miles an hour, taking tight turns and banks to avoid missiles and guns. Afterburners are only used at emergencies or for getting to a location quickly because of their fuel consumption. Uh, usually aircraft can get to cruising speed, and usually they can can fire at high speeds with their missiles. But when it comes to one-on-one dogfights, you have to lower your speed because you're doing tight turns and trying to keep yourself from getting hit. So Arsenal X, knowing that this is the case, doesn't usually need to use hypervelocity craft for normal missions, and because of the countermeasures that the aircraft held, the Aworix Screecher is capable of doing everything beneath 1,000 miles per hour. It was said that they were able to intercept two enemy aircraft that had advanced avionics and other such things. So these were 6th gen aircraft that were coming in to mess with Arsenal X. But because Arsenal X knows how to build their long-lasting and effective aircraft, the Aworix Screecher was capable of dispatching the enemy effectively and quickly. The Aworix Screecher, even though having older systems that have not yet been modernized, it was capable of outmaneuvering and getting behind the enemy aircraft very quickly because of its special propulsion design. Remember, designs of this started back in the early 30s with Arsenal X, and they were capable to get this aircraft to speed and into production by 1942. Arsenal X enhanced the design of the Screecher at around 1970 and was able to give it better and stronger propellers, better and stronger pulse engine drives, and a specialized central propulsion unit that works much like a hyperfan jet engine. This allows the aircraft to use a crystal power drive inside of it to push itself at around 980 miles per hour for extended periods of time. Remember, Arsenal X got power crystals back in the 1940s, and that's one of the things that, powered the Night Stalker. And, because of the immense power of these crystals, uh, it, the not Night Stalker, well, any craft that has these pretty much has a miniature nuclear reactor inside of them. They produce an immense amount of power, and it's pretty much, you guys know how the sun, burns its own fuel and can last for an incredibly long time. Pretty much Arsenal X found nobody really knows how Arsenal X got a hold of these crystals, but they work a lot like how a sun works. They produce an incredible amount of power, you know, and are incredibly fuel efficient and don't need to be recharged for a severely long time, like an incredibly long time. So, unfortunately, this still archaic craft was intercepted by the two enemy aircraft, and these were very new sixth-generation fighters fighting against one of Arsenal X's oldest aircraft. But because of the systems being advanced and to modern-day specifications, even though they were 50 years old, this allowed the aircraft to have some level of fighting that could match the enemy aircraft. The pilots knew that they could not outspeed the enemy aircraft, but they knew they could outmaneuver and outgun the enemy because of the advanced hypervelocity cannons and hyper-missile systems. So, diving into an area where the enemy would have to fly slower, the pilots of the Screecher were capable of performing unimaginably tight turns using a mixture of their advanced propeller design and hyperpulse jump drive that allowed them to jump forward suddenly using a pulse of energy. Pretty much the hyperpulse jump drive causes a small spatial anomaly that, you know, it doesn't teleport the craft, but it shoves it forward in this weird kind of bubble in like 1 second intervals. So if you're like right behind the craft, suddenly it teleports a couple 100 meters away. But they can only use it so very often because it uses a lot of power and it only has so many charges before it has to be charged back at home. The hyperpulse drive can also disrupt enemy systems because of its electromagnetic and radioactive properties. So every time that they would use this drive, the enemy systems would be forced to do a hard reset, and that would cause them to be incapable of tracking them for a few seconds at a time. This would give the Screecher enough time to evade and possibly get behind the enemy craft. By this time, the Screecher was using 1970s tech, but still very advanced systems that would allow them to battle modern-day sixth-generation fighters. Remember, Arsenal X back in the 70s had technology that would make even today's technology seem archaic. They were already working with fluidic displays and new kind of hypersiphon propulsion. The reason why I say fluidic is because you put your hands inside of this like weird 3D mesh, and that allows you to interact with different parts of the aircraft, almost as if it was tactile response. So the craft can pull much tighter turns and be able to protect the pilots inside from excessive G-forces. Because of the advanced, clothing and flight suits, and the way that the Aurora Screecher, updated, can fly, this allows them to take much tighter turns at higher velocity than normal people can take. And because of specialized, so they have a thing called a blood pump, and these things are put throughout Arsenal X's pilots' bodies, and these blood pumps help push their blood through different parts of the body to keep blood going to the brain, so that way they can stay conscious. And because they are not really using their feet very much, the suits are tighter on the feet, tighter on the legs, not cutting off blood supply, but limiting it so that way more blood can be used for the upper body. So that also makes it so that way the fighter pilots can handle a lot more without hurting themselves. So with the advanced systems, the Screecher was able to track the enemy using a background radiation tracker. This allows for anomalies and heat sources to be tracked much easier because there is a natural background radiation which is super low that doesn't hurt anybody but can still be detected. So that means that the Aurora Screecher was capable of was capable of detecting where the enemy was at all times using a different kind of system, even if its main, tracking system is shut down. Because of the hypervelocity cannons that the Screecher has, it is able to hold much more ammunition than the normal aircraft because of the quickness of the shells, leaving the body of the craft at around 6,000 feet per second. Because, which does make close combat virtually instantaneous. And because of the anti-recoil systems that Arsenal X was working on, and with these new hypervelocity cannons, this meant that the shuttering of the cannons would not hurt the craft because of the power, because of the anti-recoil systems. They work similar to that of the recoilless rifle, but also different. Like it is, guys. You never really know truly how Arsenal X's technology works, you know. But you can get a general idea of like how it should work. But Arsenal X, they are far more advanced than you can comprehend. And it also has a hyperpulse laser system. This would allow the Screecher to be able to burn small holes in enemy craft that could possibly disrupt circuits or avionics or functions of the aircraft. So, this little laser also has a limited use just because of the amount of power that is used. It is a special radiation laser that bombards a small area with, deadly energy. So, I mean, it has its own power supply, so that way the main body of the aircraft can still do all of its own stuff. And same thing with the hyper pulse jump drive engine. So you only get so many shots with the hyperpulse laser before it has to be given time to recharge. But yeah, it's a great defensive weapon that allows the fighter craft to protect itself when being pursued from behind. So diving down from the higher altitude, scripture. All right, I am back. Sorry about that, guys. Here we are. So diving down from the higher altitude, the Screecher, not Scripture, was capable of reaching the ground exceptionally quick while evading enemy tracking. It was still able to use a specialized radiation jammer to disrupt the enemy systems. For the time being, it needed to get down and low to the ground to where more obstacles would be. Flying at around 600 miles per hour, the Aworks Screecher found an area with natural rock formations that would be able to take advantage of and make the enemy waste their munitions. So much like the scene from Top Gun Maverick, they were able to find valleys and crevices in the ground and small mountains where they would be able to fly in between and defend themselves from missiles and the tracking systems of the enemy fighter craft. Because of the power of the engines of the Aworks Screecher and its armored coating and body, it was able to take multiple bursts from the enemy aircraft directly while suffering only minor scratches to the upper coating. Remember, this is using Graphene X diamond coat armor, so impacts and explosions are very limited because of the advanced armor of this craft. So after getting down and close to the ground, the Aworks Screecher quickly deployed its rear defense hyperpulse laser defense turret. This allowed the fighter craft to be able to lock onto the enemy aircraft and start burning tiny holes in the structural strongpoints of the 6th Gen fighters. Taking a few more bursts of ammunition to the body of the craft, one of the output nozzles was slightly damaged due to an internal hit from an armored penetration round. And that caused the central jet engine to malfunction slightly. So this made it so that way its upper speed, the Aworks Screecher's speed would only be around 700 miles per hour instead of 900, and the self-healing systems of the aircraft would need to be deployed. This meant that the Aworks Screecher would have to use only its jump drive and propellers to move, reducing its acceleration and maneuverability. So, shutting down the main hyperjet engine, the pilots activated the specialized propellers and immediately overdrove the engines to their highest ability. So remember, this is the body of the Aurorix creature, right? It's kind of a rough design of what it is. It runs 2 counter-rotating propellers in the front, 2 counter-rotating propellers in the back. Its hyperpulse laser is in the back, right here, and it's super big, mega strong jet engine is back here, giving itself thrust. But that is shut down, so we can't use that now, can we? At the front of the craft are its hypervelocity cannons. Boom, boom. So it has 2 of those, so that way it can, hit enemy craft. And this is the cockpit. So this tri-winged designed hyper screecher is incredibly maneuverable because of its 3-wing design. And you think that would make it have a lot more drag, but because of the special shape and design of the craft, it is able to fly very stable and well. So you guys know how in like the early 60s when rockets came out, and all these science fiction movies with wings a lot like this on the side of a rocket, or even stuff like that, and this is the main body of the rocket. That's kind of what the shape of the wings of the hyper screecher have. It is just a whole bunch. It's 3 really weird looking wings that can morph in shape according to what it needed. So yeah, the hyper screecher looks like something that came out of the 1950s. But it is a aircraft that is capable of even combating modern day aircraft because of its capabilities. So even though the aircraft is going now at a max 700 miles per hour, it was still able to use its thrust vectoring gimbal enabled quad linear propeller design. And the reason why it's called the quad linear propeller design is that all 4 propellers are working in conjunction to each other on the same plane. So, it's not like, normal World War II aircraft. It is, 2 propellers in the front, 2 propellers in the back, giving it incredible thrust. And remember, this is Arsenal X. They have found ways to push past the limits of normal technology. So, this may be, unobtainable by normal standards, but for Arsenal X, this was easily able to be done. So this allowed the Aurorix creature to get to high speed very quickly. The Aurorix creature was known during World War II for having unimaginably powerful propulsion and incredible acceleration on the battlefield. So even though not as good as a jet engine, it would still do fine. The hyperpulse laser fired directly into the right eye of the enemy pilot, blinding them and causing the aircraft to pull off. Now, remind you guys, this is kind of something that works along the lines of that, Soviet particle accelerator that shot that one person in the eye with its particle. This is kind of like a particle laser, so it pretty much burned through the skull of the enemy pilot pretty quickly. This laser was able to burn through the eye and into the frontal part of the brain, causing the pilot to suffer a seizure and crash shortly after. Usually the doctrine of Arsenal X is not to use laser weapons against other pilots directly, but this was one of the few times that the pilots knew they had to break that boundary. It isn't a rule, but it's just showing proper respect to the enemy pilots. Arsenal X does still try to be honorable when they can. The other pilot of the enemy fighter craft was able to eject before the plane crashed into the ground at around 600 miles per hour. But unfortunately, the pilot of the craft did die in the crash. Now, there was only a one-on-one, and this meant that the Aurorix creature was capable of taking this one on personally. Jumping back into the sky at an incredible 700 miles per hour, the Aurorix creature worked very hard on using its self-repairing systems to get that damaged part of the nozzle swapped out for a new one. One of the really cool things about the AS is that it was able to be fixed from the inside, and its main central hyperjet system is able to be given maintenance on mid-flight. The other fighter craft was enraged that their friend was killed by a very old, out-of-date craft. So they went headlong at the Aurorix creature and wanted to blow it out of the sky. One of the ways that the Aurorix creature is able to evade missiles is using its Auroric plasma drive to send out waves of plasma, disrupting the enemy's missiles guidance systems and radar locks. So after getting a missile lock warning, the Aurorix creature vented plasma drops from its body, causing the enemy missile to lose track of it and explode harmlessly in the air. The enemy fighter was capable of holding 8 missiles, so that was 1 down and 7 more to go. Quickly maneuvering, the AS fired its hypervelocity cannons and struck multiple times to the main body of the enemy fighter craft. But because the enemy had a self-sealing body design, the burning rounds were just lodged inside of its body, and the secondary systems kicked in, allowing the enemy fighter jet to stay in the fight. These were advanced fighters that would make even America's fighters, seem out of date, because this was a new advanced fighter craft that was able to have redundant systems built into it, and even able to have a early version of self-healing. This concerned the pilots of the Aurorix creature because they realized that the enemy fighter craft was going to be a little bit harder to put down than the other one was. Luckily, the Aurorix creature was equipped with nano-missiles, and they were based off of the design of the Night Stalker, and this allowed the AS to launch a micro-missile at the enemy. Unfortunately, the other fighter jet maneuvered quickly enough, and the missile exploded using a proximity fuse, only showering the enemy fighter with small pieces of metal, not enough to do real damage. The Aurorix creature only had 6 of these micro-missiles, so they only had 5 more to go. As the enemy fighter craft and the Aurorix creature danced, a deadly dance in the sky, more and more of their missiles and munitions were being used up, and pretty soon, after misses and misses, both sides were out of missiles and countermeasures, and after multiple holes being burned in the enemy fighter craft, both sides were running low on power and fuel. Pretty much, constantly using its, plasma drop system and its hyperpulse laser, it had to start working into the power design, the power crystals of the main body of the craft that would be used to power its main hyperjet system. So this would, cause the effectiveness of the hyperjet to be less effective, and this concerned, the pilots of the Aurorix creature. The Aurorix creature was full of holes and shrapnel wounds, and its cockpit was cracked. It's because the cockpit took a direct missile hit. But luckily, the advanced crystalline armored transparent, graphene-coated, cockpit was what it was. It was able to only be cracked, not completely obliterated by the missile. But this meant that it would not be able to take another missile hit because it was a direct missile hit. But it was still fighting strong and had only its hypercannons left. The enemy fighter craft also only had its cannon left, and it had no more flares. Both pilots were exhausted, sets of pilots, and the 2-man team of the Aurorix creature and the 2-man team of the enemy fighter craft wanted to get this done and out of the way. So they both turned toward each other, a few miles out, and put their engines to max and went down at each other's throats with the fighting spirit of that of a tiger. The hypervelocity cannons started to rain fire uh, upon the enemy first, shortly followed by the enemy fighter craft's GAU 10.5mm cannon. Explosive rounds uh, racked both craft as they neared each other, wanting to destroy the other. Sorry, guys. Voice typing on this phone is abysmal, and I seem to have missed a lot of them, so that's why I'm making corrections to this as I explain this to you. Because of the powerful frontal armor of the Aurora Screecher, it was able to take most of its hits without much trouble, but unfortunately one of the pilots was struck by a stray round and suffered damage to their shoulder. This meant that they would have to fly the plane one-armed due to the shoulder joint being shattered by the big round. The round was stopped by the gel coating of the special armored seat so that the pilot in the back would not be struck by the bullet. The automated medical systems of the Aurora Screecher sensed that its pilot had been struck, and it immediately shot itself straight up into the sky to catch the enemy by surprise and give the pilots enough time to be thrown into the back. The Aurora Screecher used a maneuvering system to flatten the seats of both pilots so they could change seats in case the front one was compromised. This took about 30 seconds, but still enough time for the rear pilot to take hold of the controls of the Aurora Screecher. Then, automated systems started working on plugging up the wound with a specialized coagulant gel and stopped a large portion of the bleeding. After putting a pressure pack on the pilot, this helped bring down the pain a little bit, while the front pilot dove back down to engage the enemy pilot. Already in pursuit, they saw cannon shells whizzing past the cockpit. This new pilot knew he had to pull a very daring maneuver and immediately engaged the aircraft's air brakes. This caused the enemy fighter craft to have to immediately pull up to avoid hitting them, and this allowed the hypervelocity cannons to open fire as the enemy passed and it struck the lower portion of the enemy aircraft. Then, because of the unique design of the Aurora Screecher, this allowed them to slow around to 20 miles in the sky, or 20 miles per hour in the sky, causing the enemy to overshoot again, as they were pretty much hovering in place. Then, out of nowhere, the engines of the Aurora Screecher reversed, and they were officially flying backward. This was terrifying for the pilots because they realized that they would have to fight flying backward, and because of the weird design that they were still getting used to of the Aurora Screecher, this meant that they would have to do everything backward. So the enemy fighter pilot, seeing what was going on, was in complete shock and knew that they had to put this aircraft down before they ran out of ammunition. The enemy fighter craft only had about 100 rounds left in their cannon. And, because of the weird design of the Aurora Screecher, it's very hard to put it down. About 15 seconds later, cannon shells rained around the Aurora Screecher as they could hear pinging of the metal hitting their craft. The hyperjet system was able to be fixed by this time by the automated repair systems, and that meant that the Aurora Screecher is capable of going Mach 1.2 now because of this. So, engaging their hyper propulsion system, it was able to activate and overdrive its reverse thrust vectoring system, allowing the jet to fly backward at incredible speed. The pilots, still obviously shaken because they were flying backward, knew that they had to get this enemy taken down before their craft was shot down. So, taking the controls and putting his finger on the trigger, he knew he only had 70 rounds left of the hypervelocity ammunition. So, diving back toward the ground, backward, mind you, at Mach 1.2, the Aurora Screecher opened and fired upon the enemy aircraft, showering it in shells and seeing pieces of the enemy aircraft start to fall off. The enemy pilots at this time were fed up and were going to chase this thing down to hell if they had to. And that's pretty much what they did. There was a volcano that was underneath their position, and the Aurora Screecher kept firing its last few shells into the enemy. In the next few seconds, one of the wings of the enemy aircraft broke off, and one of their engines exploded because of the deep penetrative power of the Aurora Screecher's shells. Immediately activating their air brakes and reverse thrusters, the enemy aircraft flew past the works creature, scraping along its body, damaging 2 out of the 4 propellers, causing damage to the main body. Although heavily damaged, the works creature was still able to fly. Unfortunately for the enemy pilots, they had to eject, and they ejected right before their aircraft slammed into the volcano below. Now, with alarm systems blaring from every angle, the works creature had to limp its way back home using 2 out of the 4 propellers it had, and a damaged jet system engine, and one of its wings completely sheared off by the enemy fighter jet. But you guys know how the Germans during World War II had this kind of weird tri-wing design rocket powered jet that would fly with its wings spinning around. This is kind of what the works creature had. The works creature was also able to maneuver its wings around its body, much like that. So if one of the wings was sheared off, it would still be able to use the other 2 to, do its stuff. But luckily, because of the tri-wing design of the works creature, this allowed it to be able to fly sideways at a crooked angle to keep itself aloft. Sending out a distress signal, the works creature contacted Arsenal X and told them of their situation. Unfortunately, they heard radar pings on their damaged aircraft as another sortie of enemy fighters was coming to shoot them down. And because of the damage to the works creature, it was not in any shape to fight because its ammunition was depleted and it had no maneuvering capability left. As the enemy fighter jets closed in on them, the pilots said a prayer and engaged the self-destruction system that once the aircraft was hit, it would overload its reactor and detonate with a 3-megaton nuclear explosion, erasing all trace of it along with its people. Remember, this was an aircraft that was testing out new things, and if Arsenal X let the stuff get captured, the enemy would probably be able to reverse engineer parts of it, and that would be very, very bad. So 10 agonizing seconds later, as the timer started to count down, new radar pings showed up on the display as friendly, and they were coming in hot and fast. It was the Night Stalker accompanied by the Hyperlancer, a hypersonic interception fighter. Suddenly, one of the enemy aircraft blew up in a magnificent, colorful explosion as a hypervelocity missile struck it with the force of a train. The enemy aircraft was completely atomized and the pilots were obliterated within a nanosecond. This caused the other pilot to break off as another missile just barely missed him and exploded near his craft, showering him in hypersonic pieces of metal, causing damage to the lower parts of his craft. The Night Stalker, obviously enraged by seeing one of its friendly aircraft co-piloted by a new artificial intelligence system, was damaged, and went to go attack the other fighter. So, the Night Stalker is, close friends with artificial intelligences that Arsenal X makes, and seeing that the artificial intelligence of this new craft, was damaged, this enraged it. So, the pilots of the works creature were able to hack into the enemy fighter craft's audio output for their communications array, and the nearby unflyable astronic a works creature could hear screams of terror and laughing in the background as the Night Stalker went to go attack him. "Oh goodness, what is this thing? I can see eyes everywhere. I can't get away from it. It's coming for me. It's coming after our souls. Everything is going dark. All I hear is laughter. I can't maneuver away from it. What do I do? All 10,000 eyes are looking at me. Help!" And, so pretty much, remember, the works creature is capable of sending people into fits of terror and uncontrollable fear. So the enemy fighter jet was doing everything it could to get away. Suddenly, the Night Stalker, flying alongside the enemy fighter craft, twirled itself in a corkscrew around the enemy fighter craft, launching hundreds of explosive rounds into the enemy fighter craft, causing catastrophic damage and breaking apart the 6th-gen fighter. The Hyperlancer was the only 6th-gen fighter that Arsenal X had that was on this recovery mission after getting pings of data from the artificial intelligence that it was under attack. The enemy pilots were torn apart inside by the shrapnel rounds put on the cockpit by the Night Stalker. So pretty much it turned these rounds into a blender, and their bodies were cut apart. Like, you could only see red because their bodies were blown apart. Suddenly their craft blew up with the force of a large bomb. Pieces went everywhere. The Night Stalker was pleased with this result and proceeded to very carefully fly next to the limping Works creature. The Hyperlancer flew large circles around the location, making sure no other aircraft came to attack, while the Night Stalker and the Works creature carefully flew home, making sure not to put more stress on the already damaged body of the Works creature. Despite the Night Stalker being very malevolent against his enemies and often downright psychotic and evil, it showed utmost care to the pilots and the damaged aircraft as it limped its way back home. With the damaged hyperjet system and two propellers and one wing sheared off, it was difficult for the craft to maintain a positive lift ratio, so ever so gently, the Night Stalker would fire a small charge from its body onto the nose of the reverse flying Works creature, and it would fire a small thruster pushing the nose of the craft up, so that way it could limp its way back home. Well, I guess technically the rear of the craft, not the nose, because it was flying backward. Using its supernatural properties that no other enemy establishments could detect, let me try that again. Because of its supernatural properties, the Night Stalker was capable of cloaking itself and the damaged Works creature from scanners because of its ability to disrupt normal space-time to a certain degree. And the Hyperlancer, because it was one of the newest designs of the of Arsenal X. Like, remember, they had two Hyperlancers. They had one Hyperlancer that they made during World War II, and then they have a new modern Hyperlancer that was able to cloak itself by its own means. So technically, I guess it would be the Hyperlancer 2.0. But yeah, obviously in extreme pain and losing blood, the pilot rotated his seat and was able to work on the injured pilot behind him while these 2 hours slowly went by. After getting the pieces of the bullet out of the other pilot's body and putting shunts in to repair the damaged veins and blood vessels, and then using a specialized neural mapping machine to input new neurons and nerves, the injured pilot was patched up for the most part and was given a special dose of Omni-Blood, a special blood that is capable to be used on any and all people and regenerates the body's depleted reserves of blood and fluid. Very weak, the veteran pilot was very thankful for his friend that patched him up and applauded him for showing such care in mending his wound. After 2 agonizing hours later, all 3 planes made it home safe and sound. This was usually Arsenal X does not need to have a mobile base, so that's one of the reasons why they have hypersonic craft to intercept in case one of their test craft is under attack. Because usually the test craft is more than capable of maneuvering itself around and defeating the enemy or holding them at bay until the fast response vehicles can get there. And this was one of the things that made Arsenal X realize, hey, we gotta make sure we always have, other aircraft in the area, because if this happens again, we don't want to lose our people or our aircraft. So now the difficult part after they got home, after 2 agonizing hours, was landing the aircraft sideways, and that was something that the Night Stalker was capable of doing. Because of the supernatural properties of the Night Stalker, this allowed it to use its 10,000 eyes to emit thrust underneath its specialized tentacle. Underneath it. Wow, let me try that again. Woof. And then as it was, maneuvering with those 10,000 eyes, specialized tentacles formed underneath it and grabbed onto the damaged Awork's creature. After slowing the trajectory of the Awork's creature and getting it to a point where it could use its own vectoring thrust to lower the weight of its body, both of them were able to land the damaged plane on the ground with little trouble. Because of one of the wings being sheared off, the plane had to be landed in a weird angle because it wasn't able to land vertically like it was normally able to. So a few seconds later, the terrifying beast of a plane, the Night Stalker, landed gently like a bird on the ground next to it, and it used a special laser to cut open the cockpit so that the pilots could get out and get medical attention. The damaged O'Rourke's creature was immediately wheeled off and submitted for autopsy, as well as battle footage and other information that was taken from this experience. The craft was later submitted for reconstitution and was torn apart and put back together brand new and better than before. The terrifying story of a lone craft outclassed by 6th-gen fighters surviving to tell the tale because of the teamwork of its friends to get it back home safe and sound ended with a good conclusion. And yeah, so the Night Stalker is one of those few planes that, even though uh almost 80 years old, uh is still more than capable of fighting even the most advanced technology today because of its supernatural capabilities. And this, went to show that Arsenal X had to quickly retract all of its, current Auroric creatures and update them. They will still have similar designs, but they will have massively updated armor, systems, weaponry, cannons, and so much more. Because Arsenal X does not want their pilots to be in this situation again. Both pilots made a full recovery, and the Night Stalker was very pleased to hear that its friend was reconstituted and put back into service very shortly after its nearly fatal fight. And you know, from this point on, Arsenal X, uh, you know, always had a hyperlancer flying very high in the atmosphere above the location where they were testing out new technology or advancements. So that way, if a enemy tried to intercept it, the hyperlancer would be able to do what was needed to put the enemy in the ground. But even still, majorly outdated, and using 60-year-old technology, um, the Auroric's creature was still capable of outperforming, two 6th-gen fighters, and that is phenomenal, considering this was a mainly propeller-driven aircraft that had, was kind of Frankensteined around this new central propulsion unit. And from this point on, Arsenal X actually advanced their designs even further. And this is huge. This is a massive achievement because now the modern day, even now today as of 2023, the new advanced Auroric's creatures, even though still having propellers, are far more capable than what the older Auroric's creatures were capable of. And because of the new advances made to them, now one can take on an entire squadron of enemy fighter jets and take them down because of the new design and enhancements that were made of this craft. And then the Hyper Screecher, uh, which is a new variant that uses a new design With the effectiveness and versatility of the Works creature, but looking completely different, is capable of going at near hypersonic speeds and still capable of flying backward, forward, up, down, left, and right, just like a dragonfly. In fact, it's one of its names is the dragonfly because it is able to fly in any direction, and it's very very cool because um, the Hyper Screecher is capable of being the new test body for Arsenal X's new stuff. Arsenal X will still use the Aurora Screecher for support craft and being able to help whittle down the enemy, but eventually Arsenal X will sadly have to give up and retire the older designs. But the Night Stalker most likely will never have to be uh, retired because of its self-evolving capabilities. But yeah, this concludes the story of how a 60-year-old craft using an 80-year-old design was capable of. I mean, yeah, actually, oh, it's almost a 100-year-old design. Yeah, it's like an 80-year-old design from the 40s was still able to outmaneuver and, damage and destroy the other two enemy craft that were coming after it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the story.